Hey everyone, and welcome to the Disney Movie Marathon. I'm Jonathan North, and this show is a spin-off of my main podcast, I Heart Movies. I've been considering doing a Disney podcast for a while now, literally years. I'm actually currently reading from a script that I mostly wrote in late 2019, a few months after I launched I Heart Movies. So now, 3 years later, I've finally decided to just go for it. Now, since I've already been doing the Disney Movie Marathon on my main podcast for a few years, for the time being, at least until I catch myself up to present day, this podcast will consist of a lot of repeats as I upload my back catalog. This will include episodes that are either part of the regular Disney Movie Marathon series on the main podcast, as well as probably any other Disney films we might cover on my other podcast, Every Version Ever, which focuses on multiple adaptations of the same source material, which, as you might imagine, includes a lot of Disney films. However, I do have episodes planned for this podcast that will be exclusive to this show. For starters, my friends Eli and Mark will be joining me for a recurring series looking at the different eras of Disney history. Disney fans have mostly agreed on a timetable, dividing each period of Disney animation into specific eras, so as we come to a new era in Disney's animated canon, we'll have a new episode to talk about it, starting with Disney's Golden Age, which will be one of the first episodes of this new podcast. In the future, I'd like the show to cover a lot more than just the main Disney canon, like I've mostly stuck to on I Heart Movies. Eventually, I want to get into stuff I've never done before, such as regularly looking at the live-action Disney movies I grew up with, and newer films that I've never seen before, like Disney Channel and Disney Plus originals, and eventually get into things like the Pixar films, and depending on how much it might relate to other things I'm covering, maybe even some TV shows. I know there are a bunch of spin-off television shows for several classic and newer Disney films, and I'd love to talk about all that. If you've never listened to my other podcasts, you should know that I love doing miniseries. So many episodes of this show will end up being part of a series. If you listen to the main podcast, you'll notice that as I've been going through the animated canon, I've built several miniseries around many of the films I've covered so far. And I plan to continue that practice and probably do even more than I have previously. Like, when we eventually get to The Jungle Book, we'll start with the original film, then move on to the direct-to-video sequel, and then look at the live-action pseudo-sequel from the 90s. I think there was also a live-action prequel, and then we'll finish up with the live-action remake from 2017. Unless the, as far as I know, currently in production sequel to the 2017 film is out when we get to that point, then we'll finish with that one. However, there are also at least 2, if not 3, semi-related animated series, so we probably should cover those as well. The Jungle Book is just going to be a huge undertaking whenever we finally get there. And when I eventually get into doing more of the live-action films, there will be plenty to go off there as well. For example, you probably know that there have been several remakes of previous live-action Disney films, like The Parent Trap or The Absent-Minded Professor, but did you know that in some cases, there have actually been quite a few? Like, Freaky Friday currently has 4 different versions, including a musical, and The Shaggy Dog technically has 3 versions, but did you know that the original had 2 sequels, including a short-lived TV series, and the most recent Shaggy Dog film is almost more of a remake of one of those sequels rather than of the main film itself. Disney does love their franchises, and over the years there have been plenty beyond the most popular ones, including many films that have since faded into obscurity. My eventual goal with this show would be to bring back those forgotten films into the spotlight, for better or worse. But again, all that's in my future plans. For now, let's talk about what you can expect right away. Coming up first, Mark, Eli, and I did a couple of special premiere episodes. Like I mentioned before, we're talking about the Disney Golden Age, but we also thought it'd be fun to talk about some of the essential animated shorts from the early years of Disney, so we recorded 2 brand new episodes to kick off this podcast. After that, we'll get into mostly reruns for a little while as I fill out the lineup of this podcast with the main films of the Disney canon that I've already covered over the years, with a wide variety of guests. We'll start with Snow White and Pinocchio, 2 of the earlier podcasts I did, because these 2 actually predate my podcast. My cousin Sarah and I recorded the main parts of those episodes back when I was just reviewing movies on YouTube, I think probably 2017 or 2018. So these are pretty old. And then depending on when this podcast goes live, there could be a new episode in there as well as the live action in quotes, a lot of it is CGI, remake of Pinocchio is scheduled for September of 2020, and I'm recording this intro in August of 2020, so we'll see how that release lines up with the release of this podcast, but I think Eli and I are going to try and review that film soon after its premiere. After that, we hit Fantasia, and we're already at the first big miniseries of the show, covering Fantasia, Fantasia 2000, shorts that were either cut from the two main films or made for a sequel that never came to fruition, as well as a look at the live-action film The Sorcerer's Apprentice, which was very loosely based on the Fantasia segment of the same name. If you're a fan of animation, film history, and of course Disney, then this will be the podcast for you. Make sure to subscribe on your preferred podcast platform and stay tuned for all new episodes and some old favorites of the Disney Movie Marathon. Thanks for listening.